This happened about 4 years ago. I was 15 at the time, and I lived on Croatia, on one of its many islands. Now, the island I lived on was fairly big, although it only had 3 little towns, and the biggest one only had about 50 people. Most residents that lived here had cottages and came only during the summer. Otherwise, it was pretty lonely and deserted during all the other seasons. 2 of the towns were located on the coast, and the third one, which I lived on, was just 15 minutes inland, surrounded by the evergreen forest. This was a really peaceful island, and I knew basically everyone that lived there. Neighbors were extremely kind, and life here, honestly, was pretty boring and uneventful. I grew up here with only one friend, so naturally, I was really close to him. We basically did everything together. We enjoyed camping and fishing, and would often camp out in the woods near our town. My parents knew this and honestly didn't worry since there was absolutely no crime on our island, and everyone knew each other anyway. It was mid-spring, and we decided to open our camping season. We packed our things as usual and headed on the familiar path. After heading in a few hundred meters, we came across a fallen tree that was blocking the path. I thought nothing of this, since thunderstorms were really common on the island. We headed into the woods, not following any path, but I knew there should be a clearing a few dozen meters ahead. By this point, I knew the whole island like the back of my hand, and sure enough, a few minutes later, we found the clearing, and we started setting up camp. I remember the weather was beautiful that day, without a cloud in the sky. I raised the tent while my friend was out collecting wood for the fire. We ended up lighting the fire, made dinner for ourselves, and had a couple of beers. Maybe one too many. The night was extremely peaceful, and I only woke up once, but honestly, at first, I didn't know why. I thought I had heard a car engine, but I just shrugged it off as my imagination playing tricks on me, as it was really late, and I was drunk. The next night I woke up because I had to pee, so I got out of the tent, and as I did so, I noticed a strange dim light a couple of 100 meters to the north, only this time, it was a bit closer. And now, there was a strange flashing light as well. I woke up my friend and showed him the light. He thought it was pretty weird because we were the only ones who ever visited these woods, and we agreed that we would check it out the next morning. I didn't get much sleep that night, since that light really started to bug me. The more I thought about it, the weirder it seemed, and at dawn, we headed out. We didn't bring anything with us, since we expected to return shortly after, and after 20 minutes of searching, we found abandoned improvised campsites made out of tarps and some rope. In front of it, there was a fireplace that was still smoking, and it still radiated heat. Anyone who was here had a clear sight of our camp. As we searched, the only thing we found was an open can of Red Bull and a USB stick. We could tell from looking at this place that whoever was here left in a hurry. I took the USB stick and we headed back. We camped out for 2 more days before heading home, and we hadn't seen the lights since. When I got home, I forgot about everything until a few weeks later when I finally needed the bag for something else. So I unpacked the stuff and, sure enough, among the things I found was that USB stick. I was curious, so I turned on my computer to check it out, and to my absolute terror, there was only one folder on it, and it was named after me. Chills went down my spine as I stood there for the next couple of minutes just staring at the screen. And the folder was filled to the brim with pictures. They were all of me and my friend from our last 6 camping trips. I was terrified. One picture in particular stood out. It was a selfie of a man who was watching us. And I've honestly never seen this man ever before. He didn't even seem to look creepy. He looked normal. He seemed to be in his late 20s, had a nice clean haircut, and a trimmed beard, and was wearing hunting clothes. I immediately called my parents after, and we went to the police on the first ferry since there was no police station on the island. I told the police everything and gave them the USB stick. They told me that they would look into it. A few days later, though, I got a phone call from the police, and they said that they didn't know the man, and, at this current state, couldn't do anything more to help. They did say, though, that they would keep me posted on any further info. I never saw that man again, and I haven't heard anything from the police since. This happened a few years ago. I was probably in 8th grade at the time. I believe I was 13 or 14 years old. Now at the time, I walked home from school because I lived on a dead-end road just across the street from the school with no more than 6 or 7 houses on it. Weeks prior to this occurrence, I had started noticing a small red car showing up in the parking lot of the shut-down bowling alley/bar, whose back parking lot faces my street before it turns. It seemed to always be there when I walked home from school or walked my dog. A few weeks passed and I was walking home from school, and instead of the car being in the parking lot, it was parked on the side of the road on the very end just before the highway. A little background. I live in a small town with no more than 5,000 people in it, so when I say highway, I don't mean a big highway. And at this point in my life, I was probably around 5'2", 100 pounds, and I'm a female. To get to my street, you have to cross from the school parking lot, which is directly across from it. So, I didn't think anything of it due to the fact that the school had just let out, and he was in one of the most populated areas of the town at this time of day. He had parked on the left side of the road from my perspective, so I decided to cross on the other side of the road to walk around this man's car. He had his window rolled down and was wearing a tank top, which was entirely strange because it was the dead of winter. And when I made eye contact with him, he seemed to lean forward in his seat and started to ask me something. When I got a good glance at this man, he looked completely normal, maybe in his late 20s, early 30s. It was honestly just his smile that set me off. It altogether was just very wide and looked sinister. He then asked me for directions to a park nearby, which I thought was very strange because it was winter and there was snow on the ground, but I politely gave him directions and he went on his way. Or so I thought. As I turned the corner of my street, I then noticed that the car turned back around. I tried to ignore it since my house was one of the first on the street, and that's when he started creeping behind me. I started sprinting down the street and looked into my yard, and I saw that the car followed. When I got home, my dog was on the porch waiting to get let out to go to the bathroom. Now, my dog was 1.5 years old and was still considered a puppy, but still was about 50 pounds. I sat on the porch for a minute with my dog despite the freezing temperature, and when the man pulled into my driveway, he smiled right at me. At that moment, my mom came outside to let the dog in, and when she saw me sitting on the porch and yelled at me for not getting out of the cold, before I could even explain to her what was happening, the man pulled out of the driveway and drove away quickly. Fast forward about a year or so later, and I was a freshman in high school. I couldn't drive, and, mind you, I hadn't seen that car since that day. I was with a friend and her mom, and we were at the bank, and That's when I saw that car again. I'm not sure if he saw me at first, but it was probably spring at this point, so it was about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, so it was fairly warm compared to the brutal winters that we had. That being said, my friend had her window rolled down all the way, so when we passed by his car, there was a clear shot for him to see me. And as we pulled out, the car pulled out behind us and started taking every turn that we took. Now my friend and her mother quickly became aware of this, and we started driving faster and taking random turns on back roads, because that's basically what our town is. Back roads with 3 highways that pass through downtown. The car attempted to take every turn that we did, but continued to keep its distance as well. Eventually though, we lost it, and we headed back to my friend's house where I stayed the night. A few months passed, and I still live in the same house by that closed down bowling alley, and even now, every once in a while, I still see that car, just sitting there, waiting. This has been going on for years, so I'm still not sure what could happen. The police have been called several times by other people on our street to no avail. They can't do much because he technically hasn't done anything illegal, except loiter. He's still around today, and honestly, I've become kind of used to it. But even so, I still remain very cautious. Where I live, there isn't any known murders going on. No crazy assaults have happened in quite a while, and there's not much stealing either. People generally leave their doors unlocked at night. The only thing that frequently happens is that there's an occasional sexual assault case or harassment. So from time to time when I was 3, my Nana and Papa grinded into my head the idea of stranger danger, even going as far as to tell 6-year-old me about what had happened to a fellow 6-year-old at the time in another state. He was kidnapped, assaulted, and decapitated. Now I know that this wasn't appropriate for a young kid, and it's continued into my adulthood. Let's just say that now, I can tend to be a little bit paranoid. So back when I was about 8 or 9, when this first happened, me and my friend Mora, who was just a year or so younger, we were walking up the hill in our neighborhood from my house to her house for a homeschooling session. It was only about a 10-minute walk, and it was about 10 in the morning. Our neighborhood, if you could even call it that, was houses spaced out about 2 or 3 acres apart. So we had to pass about 5 properties on the right and 3 on the left to get to her house. One of the properties on the right belonged to a neighbor I had seen around, but my grandparents didn't know the owner personally. In fact, I didn't know anyone who did. He owned a pickup truck and just kept to himself. His house was further back on his property, and the property was surrounded by well-maintained bushes, very secretive. Me and my friend were passing by the gate to his property, and I heard a car coming up behind us, and that's when I see that it was his pickup. I tried to shrug it off, but the idea of stranger danger kept going off in my head. I tried to ignore it, just thinking, I'm scared. We live in a safe place. He pulled up right in front of us and swerved in our path so we couldn't get past to continue up the hill. I grabbed Mora immediately and yanked her to the side, my head screaming stranger danger and decapitation, and we immediately took off towards the property next to his. We hopped the fence, and we run into some trees only 10 feet away from the fence. I yanked my friend behind the first tree that we run by. I didn't want him hearing us or seeing where we ran. He casually walked up to the fence line and crouched to a child's level and scanned the forest, looking hard to see if he could find what he was looking for. He was only 10 feet away, and we were holding our breath. He stood back up after only a few seconds and left in his truck. The man began heading up the hill, and we freaked out and waited a minute before bolting up the hill. Being the young kids that we were, we forgot about it in about an hour, and we told no one. So flash forwards about 6 or so years, and I'm 14 or 15, and walking my landlord's dog up the same hill. And yes, I still lived in the exact same place. I didn't walk this dog with a leash because it was relatively well trained. I only had her black dog with me, and by the time we were about to pass the gate, a larger pickup truck came hauling ass out of the lane, and me and my landlord's dog jumped back. Jules, which was the dog's name, looked scared shitless, and I was a bit unnerved too. The guy looked at me with a pissed off expression and started to continue pulling out when a big black old Jules decided that she's not letting him go anywhere. She stood in front of his truck and began barking and growling. He looked to be even more upset, and I'm now yelling at Jules to stop. She persisted for a minute or so, until the man stared at me with a fucking angry-ass look. Jules caught this and immediately stopped and ran like hell towards home. I screamed at her to come back, but it was no use. I attempted to apologize awkwardly to him, and started walking back down the hill to make sure that Jules got home safe. Honestly, this surprised me, because she never, ever acted like that before. Now, from this driveway you can see my lane down the hill. The creepy fuck was sitting in his truck, watching me walk until I was nearly to my lane. This creeped me out the whole way, and in my head, all I could think was stranger danger. He then began driving, and caught up to me before I could reach my lane. He then said,
"Excuse me."
And I replied, "Yes," but continued walking.
"Can you check to see if my car door is closed? I don't think it is all the way."
All the while, still driving at my pace. I looked at the passenger door, and it looked fine. I was really creeped out at this point, and I pretended to look good and hard at it, and told him, "Looks fine to me."
"Well, can you check it? It's really bugging me."
I'm not stupid. I was not going within arm's reach of the car. I keep persisting that it looks fine, and he kept telling me to check on it. He seemed to be getting more and more irritating, and kept persisting. He did this for a while, and his tone started to scare me. That is, until I flatly told him no. As I did so, I realized that I was only a few steps away from my lane. I yell, "Your door looks fine. I gotta go. Sorry," and run down my lane. The creepy fuck sits in his truck and gives me an angry glare the whole way, and I continued to do so back to him. The man then slowly drove past my property, still glaring and angry. I ran inside, making sure to tell off Jules for ditching me. I've had other creeps bug me, but this man cornered me when I was both 8 and 15 years old. Maybe it was just all a coincidence. I honestly don't think it was, but I just can't rule out how creepy he was at all. I rarely ever think of this. I think I mostly blocked it out by this point. I'm a female, and when I was 25, I was in a transition period of my life. I was divorcing my husband and moving back to my home estate to figure things out. My aunt had a small 1,500 square foot 1950s house in a quiet neighborhood. It was the type of place that had doors that creaked, squeaky wood floors, you know, that type of place. She had moved out, but couldn't commit to selling it. She was happy though to have me live there for a bit, and I did live there for about 5 months. The house was a single-story home, but it was on a hill, so if you went around the back of the house outside, you could walk through a door into a small basement of sorts you could stand in. If you were in this small basement and continued to walk towards the front of the house, you would quickly be crouching and then crawling, and eventually it would lead you to a small concrete storage area that was directly under my bedroom. One thing I remember about this place was that it was creaky and not well insulated, and when you were down in the basement area, you could see a sort of light coming through the cracks in the bedroom floorboards. I maybe went down there once, got creeped out, and then left immediately. It was around the back of the house, like I said, and I never really had a reason to ever be back there. Time passed, and I got my dream job and was moving out of the house. I was also moving out of state, and my aunt had one request of me: to turn the water off at the street before I fully left. So right before I leave the house, I turn the water off at the street. I come back inside and turn off the tub faucet. No water. I had done my job. However, this is where fate steps in. Apparently, I'd left one of the faucets turned on, and I didn't think to turn it back off, and drove away to my new life. Although, a few days later, my aunt called, and she was upset that the water company had called her to say that there was an unusually high amount of water being run at her home. I promised her that I had turned off the water and told her about checking the tub. Unfortunately though, I was out of state and so was she. So my mom decided to take on the task and go over and figure out what was going on. Well, only a little while later, I came to find out that my neighbor's husband from next door had been kicked out around the same time I had moved in. He decided to take it upon himself to move into the little room under my bedroom. He had strung an electrical cord over the fence from his house. He had clothes and a toothbrush. I guess he was bathing in our yard. And when I turned off the water, he went right back out to the street and turned it back on himself. He had been living right under my bedroom floorboards, and I'm tense just writing and remembering this. I never ever want to meet this guy again, and the thought of a stranger being right under my feet, listening to me in my bedroom, that still gives me chills. It started almost exactly 3 years ago. It'll be 3 years in August. It was when I was a freshman in university. I'd gotten hired in a student job on campus, and I was super happy since I lived at the dorms and didn't have a car, so I wouldn't have been able to drive anywhere for a job. My first day of work, I met the students I'd be working with. Some of them had been there for a couple of years, and others were just hired like me. One of them was a guy named Ronnie. Ronnie and I got along right away. He was nice and funny, and I didn't feel awkward or uncomfortable talking to him. But that feeling only lasted for about 2 days. A couple of days after we first met, he added me on Facebook and started messaging me a lot. He'd ask about my day and what I did and what I loved. You know, all those questions you ask to get to know someone. And maybe I'm just a jerk, but I didn't feel like becoming besties with him, so I soon started feeling somewhat annoyed. I didn't mind talking to him at work, but outside of work, I didn't want to be chatting with him 24/7. This went on for a few weeks. Even if I took hours to reply, he'd respond right away. Or even if I sent a short message, he'd reply with the whole paragraph. He just couldn't get a hint. He'd asked me out several times before I finally said okay, and we went out for ice cream. This is when it got really weird. He started asking questions about the guys that I hung out with. At first, I was just answering casually like, oh, my friends from high school? Or my cousins? Or the guys from the church? But then I realized that he was asking about specific guys. Like, he said something about
That guy you went to go watch a movie with last Thursday. Who was that?
This question completely freaked me out. I cut this ice cream hangout short and said that I had to go home. Honestly, things went downhill from there. He'd message me every single night, asking about people I talked to that day, or why I looked sad coming out of my class. At work, he'd leave little notes on my desk, or One Direction cutouts because I'd mentioned that I liked them one time, or even chocolates. My coworkers just teased me, saying that he had a huge crush on me, not knowing how creepy he was being outside of work, and I started seeing him everywhere. I'd see him sitting near the exits when I was walking out of my classes, or if I was late night studying at a library on campus, I'd see him sitting a few tables away. Back then, I was kind of naive, and I just let this happen. And before I finally knew it, it had gone too far when one day one of my guy friends from high school, who I hadn't seen since we graduated months before, came into my office and started talking to me. We talked for about an hour or so, and that night, I got a message from Ronnie asking me if I was okay. I replied with, "Yes, why do you always ask if I'm okay?" He responded,
Some guy was standing in front of your desk for like an hour today. I thought maybe he was giving you trouble.
Ronnie wasn't working that day, and I never saw him walk into the office, but apparently, he'd still been watching me. I soon realized that Ronnie most likely sat down at that food court, facing me, and watched me work. I replied with, "He's my friend whom I haven't seen in months, but you don't need to worry or care." I then put my phone away and ignored its replies until the next morning, when I saw that he had messaged me around 30 times. His messages talked about how he was jealous and hated seeing me with other men. They also talked about how I reminded him of his ex-girlfriend who had cheated on him with his friend, and how pissed he got about that. He then went on about how I get him pissed off sometimes and that he couldn't help it. He then went off on how depressed he was, and how his jealousy and anger got worse when he saw me with any guy, and how he will one day hurt the guys, or hurt me, or himself. This was the breaking point for me. I showed those messages to my managers at work, and they said they'd take care of it. I blocked him on Facebook and ignored him in person. All of this happened throughout the first semester of university, and as a few months passed, he decided to make a new account on Facebook and began messaging me again. He said he was sorry and that he was much better now and that he'd love to be friends. I accepted his apology and said that I was glad for him that he was better, but I also told him that we couldn't be friends and I wasn't interested in being his friend. He then got very angry and messaged me a lot of things. I decided to block him again, but even so, every few months without fail, he makes a new account and adds me and begins messaging me again. I always deny his friend request and blocked all of his messages. He recently tried to contact me again about 2 days ago. I saw his message, but I didn't reply. I'm not holding a grudge or anything, and I'm over this whole ordeal with him, but I don't understand why he keeps trying